IDF brigades are already in the gates of Gaza City, and preparations for Operation Gideon's Chariots B are complete, with massive convoys heading south under the shadow of the cover that is provided by the Israeli Air Force. Over recent days, there have been heavy waves of airstrikes in Gaza City, and most of the remaining senior officials in Hamas's terrorist police were eliminated. The leadership of Hamas is in panic mode, and they are attempting to flee to a third country. Meanwhile, Israel's Air Force is systematically taking down the high-rise towers in the city, denying Hamas the high ground for the coming battle. As for the Hamas forces in Gaza City, the IDF estimates that there are still 2 Hamas brigades inside the city, although it's unclear how well organized or equipped they are. And President Donald Trump has also said that Hamas's game is nearing the end. This is not merely a signal, it's an announcement. In the northern arena, Israel is also pounding Hezbollah targets all over Lebanon. Amidst all of this kinetic activity, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio was in Israel this week, and he told reporters that what happened in Qatar happened. We'll talk about the impact that it will have. Speaking of Qatar, their Prime Minister told the Doha Summit meeting on Sunday that he thinks Israel is a criminal and must be punished. But Qatar wasn't the only country making statements at this Doha summit. Turkish officials also piped up declaring that Israeli expansion is the great threat to this region. And finally, the Houthis in Yemen have adopted a new strategy for attacking Israel, as Iran threatens Britain, France, and Germany, saying they will lose everything because of one thing. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, reporting about everything that's happening in Israel. The IDF is already deployed and ready for the maneuver in Gaza City. Tens of thousands of soldiers may enter the city this week and begin the dramatic and extensive operation in Hamas's terror nest. At the same time, the IDF continues to encourage the civilian population to depart the city while destroying terrorist infrastructure ahead of this maneuver. This week, the IDF completed 5 waves of strikes in Gaza City, including attacks on more than 500 targets as part of the next stage of Operation Gideon's Chariots B. Traffic jams stretch along the roads southward out of Gaza City this week, as Hamas's hypocrisy was on full display. While calling on the residents of the city to stay in place, the senior leadership of this organization is doing whatever they can to leave and send their families to a third country. Elsewhere, in the shadow of the failed strike on Hamas senior leadership in Doha, Qatar last week, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived for a visit in Israel on Sunday evening. Before his flight, he clarified that the relationship between the 2 countries is strong and will not change, even though Trump was not pleased with the strike. According to him, the president is focused on ending the war, returning the hostages, and collapsing Hamas. And meanwhile, at the so-called emergency summit in Doha, Qatar's Prime Minister and the Arab Secretary General sharply attacked Israel and called for international punishment. Qatar's Prime Minister said an Israeli strike is a grave precedent that must be dealt with. However, he clarified that the strike will not cause Doha to stop its efforts to reach a deal to end the war, explaining that we will continue efforts with the United States and with Egypt. What do you guys think about all of this? Let me know in the comments. And speaking of comments, we'll have details for you about the recent vote at the United Nations General Assembly on a joint initiative by France and Saudi Arabia to establish a Palestinian state. And protests are filling the streets and also social media, and influencers are brainwashed by the Marxist and jihadist propaganda that is continuing this week on their way to the coast of Gaza. We'll have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 710 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. A coalition of jihadist groups, governments, and organizations are launching a massive funded media offensive against Israel. And as agents of evil and extremists, they spread lies and misinformation about what's happening here on the land, also around the world. This is a war against the truth. So if you want to support us and help us share what's really happening here on the ground, make sure to leave a comment, leave a like. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and click on it so that you remain tuned to the truth and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. So we'll start today's report with the latest news from the Gaza Strip. Since the morning hours of Sunday, the IDF is continuing operations to move the residents of Gaza City south towards safe zones where they will be out of the line of fire. The efforts are now being concentrated on the Rimal neighborhood in the northern parts of the Gaza City and at the Gaza port. In the Jabalia area and on the outskirts of Gaza City, the Givati Brigade combat team is operating under the 162nd Division and eliminated more than 10 terrorists over the last 24 hours alone and destroyed terror infrastructure in that area. At the same time, the 401st Brigade combat team is operating on the outskirts of the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood as part of the effort to eradicate terror infrastructures in this area. And over the weekend, the Northern Brigade forces, under the command of the 99th Division and in cooperation with the Shin Bet forces and the intelligence and also observers, set out on a focused operation to locate the last terrorist that is operating in Bet Hanun. With intelligence direction, the effort was directed to the Kasbah sector, the heart of the city, that is based on the assessment that this is the focal point of the remaining organized Hamas units. As part of the activity, maneuvering forces in the sector guided Israeli Air Force aircrafts and strikes were carried out on terror targets in that area, including tunnel shafts and a significant underground route. In addition, forces of the 11th Brigade and the Northern Brigade destroyed several military buildings that Hamas used to observe IDF forces. These are mainly strikes on high-rising buildings and Hamas military infrastructures above and also below the ground. In fact, IDF ground forces are already on the outskirts of Gaza City in the Sajaya and in the Zaytun neighborhoods. And at the same time, Hamas is also preparing for the start of the ground incursion, and Palestinian sources told Kan News in Israel that in the terror organization, several seniors and commanders were appointed to manage the fighting on the ground in Gaza. The 4 senior commanders named in these reports are Izzadin el-Haddad, the head of the military wing, Muhammad Odeh, the head of the intelligence, and Muhannad Rajab of the Hamas Gaza Brigade, who hails from a clan strongly identified with Hamas and based also in the Sajaya and in the Tufa area. Even before the start of the maneuver, according to the security sources, so far about 300,000 residents have left Gaza City. However, the IDF is preparing for the likelihood that around 200,000 to 300,000 residents will remain in the Gaza City area even after the ground incursion will begin. And speaking of which, in Gaza City, many challenges await the IDF. Hamas has been preparing for this battle for a very long time, even since the first IDF ground incursion there at the start of this war. And once again, a primary difficulty that the troops will face is the large civilian population in the city. Beyond the enemy and the combat challenges that I will detail immediately in Gaza City, there are between 600,000 and 800,000 residents. Hamas does not even try to hide the fact that it plans to use these people as human shields, and that this will present the IDF with many difficulties. The IDF spokesperson's unit in Arabic, Colonel Adichai Aderi, has published several notices to Gaza City residents in recent days, imploring them to leave the areas that the IDF is preparing to operate in. And on Sunday, he issued another statement to the residents of the city saying, "We urge you to use El Rashid Street and immediately move to the humanitarian area in El Mawasi, as well as to the vacant areas in the central camps," according to the IDF spokesperson. Meanwhile, around the Gaza Strip, hundreds of engineering vehicles have already been concentrated before entering into action. These are mainly regular battalions and on the outskirts of the city, such as the Zaytun neighborhoods from the south and the Sheikh Radwan from the north. And IDF battalions are already operating to enable the entry of the brigades into the western part of the city. The IDF is also preparing for the hostages to be moved from where they are located now, and therefore, the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, instructed to act with caution. The transfer of the hostages may be carried out under cover of the tumult of the hundreds of thousands of crossing southwards, the residents of Gaza, in the opposite direction as part of the evacuation of the city through safe corridors into which the IDF does not fire and also does not check each person going south. Regarding the danger to the safety of the living hostages that are held in Gaza City, the IDF clarified that there is no full certainty regarding Hamas's policy to harm them if army forces are heard that are approaching the location where the hostages are stationed. The IDF defined a concept called MYB, a coordinated fire zone only, where apparently there are hostages and therefore it is necessary to maneuver there cautiously even if armed terrorists are identified there. For this purpose, with the assistance of the Intelligence Directorate, for the benefit of the forces on the ground, combat techniques were developed that will reduce the risk to the hostages and still bring achievements in this war. All of this brings up a question that many have asked us in the comments, and I've also heard it being asked in many news analyses and other shows all around the world. Why is the IDF concentrating on Gaza City? So, the Political Security Cabinet made a decision to take operational control of Gaza City after rejecting several other options, and here are some of the reasons that this decision was made. First, Gaza City is a symbol, the capital city of the Gaza Strip, and in the city there are institutions and centers of government that Hamas uses and which still function, and it constitutes a center of gravity in many critical areas. No less important in Gaza City is Eldin Haddad, who not only until about a week ago was the commander of the Gaza City Brigade, but also the head of the military wing, which the elimination of Muhammad Sinwar promoted him. However, Israeli officials are not unaware that this move will result in widespread diplomatic condemnations, and this will come on top of the condemnations that resulted from last week's failed attempt to take out the senior leadership of Hamas in Doha, Qatar. Nevertheless, senior officials in the security political leadership clarify that there will be no choice but to expand the fighting in light of the dead end in the hostage deal that has now come to a complete halt because of this attempted attack against Hamas in Doha, Qatar. At the same time, the IDF is preparing for pro-Palestinian activists to try to reach Gaza by sea in parallel with the international pressure that will rise with the start of the ground operation. For example, with the Sumud flotilla that set out last week from Tunisia with the participation of dozens of vessels, Chariots 13 commando fighters have already begun preparations to take control of the boats, as was done in previous flotillas. All of this will be going on while the IDF is fighting Hamas inside Gaza City. This will not be easy, as in Gaza City there is an order of battle of about 2 Hamas brigades. Such a large quantity of terrorists with abundant weaponry, including numerous explosives, anti-tank missiles, and mines, combined with collection capabilities of intelligence for Hamas from cameras, other networks underground or above the ground, or using civilians, as well as the use of drones, will put up a strong fight against the IDF. Additionally, Hamas operates from ruins and underground infrastructures and tunnels that are organized in a kind of underground city. All these constitute a significant combat challenge for our forces, but let there be no doubt, the IDF can and must defeat Hamas. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the informations, boots on the ground style, from the field in the Gaza Strip, so that you will be able to know what's happening and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So if you want to help us, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about how this war has affected one of the most vulnerable groups in Israeli society. As Israel nears almost 2 years of war, our brave and battered Holocaust survivors are suffering like never before. These men and women endured history's darkest chapter, and now, In their final years, many face poverty, loneliness, and fear. 1 in 3 survivors in Israel lives in poverty. Many are over 90 years old, struggling with serious medical needs. And since October 7th, most say that their quality of life has collapsed. They sit in cold, empty apartments, often without safe rooms as sirens wail. Meir Panim is a lifeline. Every day, 2,200 survivors receive hot meals and deliveries. Hundreds are cared for in their centers, where they celebrate holidays like a family. So this Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, with your help, we will deliver 30,000 holiday pantry boxes, 25,000 meals and care packages, and 2 million shekels in grocery cards so that survivors can shop with dignity. Together, we can bring them warmth, nourishment, and the sweetness of a new year. Shana Tova Umetuka. So guys, if you want to help, please go now to bless-israel.org. Again, that's bless-israel.org and bless Israel's survivors today. Now, we are keeping our focus on the battle against Hamas, but shifting slightly to the international fallout from last week's strike and the leadership of the organization in Doha, Qatar. The strike has reportedly prompted Egypt to take unprecedented security measures around Palestinian officials in Cairo, including those released in previous hostage exchange deals. And amongst the prominent names of terrorist leaders being protected by Egypt's security and intelligence forces are Palestinian Islamic Jihad Secretary General Ziad el-Makhalkha. Egyptian intelligence conveyed a sharp and clear message to Jerusalem and Washington over the weekend, saying any attempt to harm Palestinian leaders on Egyptian soil, directly or indirectly, will entail very severe consequences in the Middle East. The message is perceived almost as a public declaration that Cairo is not prepared to serve as a convenient ground for assassinations, but rather the opposite. They want to serve as a safe haven for the leaders of terrorist organizations. The Egyptian embrace is not limited to Palestinian Islamic Jihad alone. The leadership of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine also moved its activity to Cairo in recent days, and its leaders are staying inside the city under direct protection of the intelligence personnel. This move signals a profound change in Cairo's policy, from a relatively neutral mediator to an official host of Palestinian terrorist actors, granting a security umbrella reminiscent of that once custodiary in Damascus and also Tehran in Iran. However, although most of Hamas's leadership apparently survived this surprise attack in Qatar's capital and may even have been unharmed, the security establishment assesses that Israel can leverage the event's results to its advantage and advance a deal to return the hostages under better terms. In Qatar itself, they still maintain silence regarding the fate of Hamas senior leaders. Two Gulf sources familiar with what is happening in Doha, Qatar, said that the Qataris are imposing top-level security and information security rules on the entire affair, including on the wounded or anyone who was near the strike that destroyed part of the Hamas office complex. As for the organization's leadership, the original target of this bombing, the source say that they are all in Doha, in a Qatari-secured compound without phones or any other transmitting devices, and they are forbidden to speak with anyone outside of the compound. Now is the question, what do you think about all of this? Is it okay for Egypt and Qatar, two close US allies, to be harboring the leadership of a terrorist organization that directly threatens the United States' security and the economic interests in the Middle East? Let me know what you think about all of this. And in the meantime, even though it does not appear that the strike in Qatar achieved the desired goal of decapitating Hamas's leadership in Israel, they still do not describe it as complete failure. They are also trying to understand what the implications of the strike will be for mediation efforts for this deal. Even after the meeting yesterday in New York between Qatar's Prime Minister Mohammed al-Thani and US President Donald Trump, Israeli intelligence officials struggled to decipher the new roadmap of all the players and whether Qatar will pull its hands from the negotiating and for the deal to push back, or understand that this is a new opportunity to be seized via Israel and Hamas. And leveraging the crisis with Qatar may even lead to another possibility, an Israeli choice of Egypt as the leading mediator with Hamas for this deal, as senior officials in the IDF and the Shin Bet have recommended more than once due to Qatar's constant support for Hamas and the long-standing funding that it provided to this terrorist organization. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself hinted last week that Israel has not abandoned the objective of eliminating Hamas's leadership, no matter where the terrorist organization leaders are hiding. And speaking of these leaders, Netanyahu posted on X that they don't care about the people in Gaza. They blocked all ceasefire attempts to drag the war endlessly. Getting rid of them will remove the main obstacle to releasing all the hostages and ending the war. And amidst all of this, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio landed in Israel on Sunday morning in the shadow of the speculations about the degree of coordination between Jerusalem and Washington. Rubio was received at the Ben Gurion airport by the United States Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and his wife, Jeanette. This is Rubio's second visit to this country since taking office last January, and at midday, Rubio came to visit the Western Wall alongside Netanyahu. At the end of the visit to the wall, the Prime Minister said, Rubio's visit is a testimony to the strong relationship between the United States and Israel. We greatly appreciate the visit. Rubio also signed the site's guest book saying, "May peace shine upon this holy land and upon the whole world," while Netanyahu wrote a blessing for the release of the hostages, for the safety of our soldiers, for the defeat of our enemies, and for the close friendship with the United States. On Monday, Rubio was scheduled to hold high-level meetings with Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials, as well as family members of the remaining hostages being held in the Gaza Strip. Before leaving for his visit to Israel, Rubio told reporters that the disagreement between Jerusalem and Washington over the strike in Doha against Hamas's top leadership will not change the American support for Israel, but he would need to talk about it and the impact it will have with the Israeli officials. Rubio also said that President Donald Trump wants Hamas defeated. He wants the war to end, and he wants all 48 hostages back home, including those who died, and he wants it all at once. The president wants Hamas to no longer be a threat so that we can move to the next stage. How to rebuild the Gaza Strip, how to provide security, how to ensure that Hamas or something similar will never return again. We will need to discuss how last week's events affected the ability to achieve that very soon. Rubio was asked if he's worried that Israel will strike in Qatar again, and whether he will ask Netanyahu not to do it again or not. He replied by saying that in the meetings we are going to hold, we will understand much better what the Israelis' plans are to move forward. What happened, happened. Now, we need to move forward and find out what happens next. I think the president's remarks speak for themselves, and he did not like the way that it was handled. But even so, our relationship with Israel will remain strong, and sometimes things happen that we may not agree with 100% or we're not happy about, but it's not going to change the nature of the relationship between Israel and the United States. In addition, Rubio leads a tough line against those who lead anti-Israel actions and opposes the move by France and also by other countries like Saudi Arabia to recognize a Palestinian state. I think it's also important to remember that on September 7th, President Donald Trump posted on his social media account, "The Israelis accepted my terms. It's time for Hamas to accept them as well. I warned Hamas of the consequences if they do not agree. This is my last warning, and there will be no further warnings." Many around the world, and also in Israel, got confused as to who the aggressor is in the Qatar event, but President Trump is not confused. It is clear to him who the bad guys are, and he chooses to stand with the good guys. President Trump indeed hates wars, but to avoid them, the other side must be convinced that it is not worth entering into them. Furthermore, Trump demanded the hostages to be released unconditionally because that is the logical thing to do. It is clear to him that Hamas leadership sitting in Doha is responsible for the invasion into Israel, for murder, for rape, and for kidnapping of innocent civilians. And they are also responsible for Hamas continuing to hold living hostages and the remains of those who they killed in captivity. The Qataris can pressure Hamas leaders to release the hostages, but they've chosen not to, or at least they've chosen not to pressure Hamas in a serious way. After all, they are the ones who continue to fund Hamas as a military arm for the elimination of Israel. On top of that, Qatar continues to fund and push a massive worldwide media campaign to delegitimize Israel and fan the flames of hatred and anti-Semitism around the world. But hatred is something that is hard to control once you release it into the world. And President Trump sees that anti-Semitism on American campuses, fueled by Qatari money, is spreading throughout the United States and threatens its social fabric. One can only hope that the surviving Hamas leaders will finally understand that the game is over, release the hostages, and give up their arms. However, President Trump spoke with reporters on Sunday, and he was asked what his message is to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He replied, "They need to do something about Hamas, but Qatar is a great ally of the United States of America. Israel and everyone else needs to be careful. When we strike people, we must be careful." It's important to remember that in the immediate aftermath of the strike, President Trump distanced himself from it in a post that he published on Truth social media network, writing that this was Prime Minister Netanyahu's decision, not mine. Later, he told reporters in Washington that he is not at all pleased with the Israeli strike in Qatar. "I'm not enthusiastic about the whole situation. It is not a good situation. We are not enthusiastic about the way that things went." In a post he published that same day, the American president claimed that bombing Qatar, a close US ally that is working very hard and taking risks to achieve peace, does not advance the goals of the United States and Israel, although he defined the elimination of Hamas as a worthy goal. He wrote that he immediately instructed Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to notify the Qataris of this strike, but unfortunately, it was too late to stop it. Following all of this diplomatic activity, on Sunday, the leaders of several Middle Eastern countries convened in Doha for what the hosts called an emergency summit. Qatar's Prime Minister delivered an especially harsh speech calling on the international community to punish Israel for its crimes and clarified that his country will not waive any violation of sovereignty, and according to him, Israeli actions will not prevent Qatar from continuing its mediation efforts, but he warned that no one will be immune from Israeli escalation if we do not stand up to it forcefully. He also accused Israel of rejecting proposals for a ceasefire in Gaza and emphasized, during the discussions that followed, Qatar's Prime Minister expressed appreciation for the Arab and the international solidarity in condemning the Israeli attack. Alongside him, the Secretary General of the Arab League delivered especially severe remarks, calling to stop the Israeli criminal machine for the disgraceful war. The Secretary General added that the shameful neglect and silence of the international community towards the crimes of the occupation encourage Israel to commit more crimes. He further said that the Israeli strike on Qatar combined a cowardice, treachery, and stupidity. Israeli intelligence officials assess that Qatar is trying to exploit the momentum created for it following the strike and to present itself as the leading in regional front against Israel. To this end, they are sending messages to two audiences. One audience is their own citizens saying that they will respond forcefully after the two strikes that it experienced in recent months from both Iran and also from Israel. Remember, Iran also struck Qatar. Another audience, Qatari officials, are speaking to is the governments and the people in the rest of the region and the wider world, saying that they are steadfast against Israel. The assessment is that Qatar will lead moves in the diplomatic and into the legal arenas, including promoting resolutions and official condemnations that will increase pressure on Israel and embarrass it in the international arena. In Israel, these events are being closely monitored with hopes of preventing further deterioration in Israel's diplomatic standing in this region. However, the prevailing assessment is that the Arab response will focus on declarations and messages and other diplomatic steps and will not escalate into a military move. We'll see what happens. So the lies and the hypocrisy on display by the nations of this region, including Qatar, but also Turkey and Iran, are quite shocking, even to someone like me who was born and raised in this Middle East all my life. So Qatar is a state with a tiny population and very little military power, using its money and its political power to try indirectly to support terrorist organizations, and everywhere that Qatari money is, there is a trail of blood and murder. If it wasn't for the massive natural gas reserves that Qatar controls and its strategic location in the middle of the region dominated by much larger countries, no one anywhere would care about them. But this world runs on energy and money, and Qatar has a lot of both, so they think that they can ignore the truth and get away with it. Sadly, much of the time, they're not wrong to think this way. That is why I'm asking all of you to help us share the truth, because it matters. Israel needs your help more than ever. So if you want to help us, first of all, like, leave a comment, share this video, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And now, let's switch our focus to some of the other fronts in this war. On Sunday, after several days of pause, the Houthis in Yemen launched another UAV towards the Ramon airport in Israel. The Air Force successfully intercepted the aircraft, but alerts of rocket and missile fire in the area were activated due to concern over falling interception debris, parts of the missile. After the significant IDF strike in Sana'a, Yemen, which came about 2 weeks after the dramatic action to eliminate the Houthi political leadership, the Houthi terrorist organization may decide to change its strategy in this war against Israel. And according to recent report in the Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar, they are considering. A military source in Yemen told the Lebanese newspaper Al-Akhbar that the latest Israeli strike in Sana'a is expected to lead the Houthis in Yemen to expand their target bank inside Israel and change operational tactics. The change described by the Houthi military source is focused on moving from the current attacks, which are directed at one city or one focal point at a time, to combine attacks in multiple focal points. He further added that the attacks may not come only from the air, but also in combination with attacks from the sea and from the land. He said it was hoped that this will confuse the enemy and deplete its capabilities, especially its air defensive capabilities. According to Al-Akhbar, this combined large-scale strike has been in preparation since the dramatic strike on the Houthi political leadership about 2 weeks ago, in which, amongst other things, Houthi Prime Minister Ahmed El-Rawawi was targeted together with several ministers. Elsewhere, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned on Saturday that Britain, France, and Germany risk losing everything if they proceed with reinstating United Nations sanctions on Tehran in Iran, according to a report in the media portal Iran International. The threat came in response to a step taken by the 3 European countries on August 28, when they activated the snapback mechanism under Security Council Resolution 2231. In a post on X, Araghchi claimed that the 3 European countries have no legal, political, or moral right to activate the mechanism. According to him, the rule of use it or lose it is not relevant in this case, rather the opposite. Use it and lose everything. The Iranian foreign minister did not detail exactly what might happen to the European countries, but the threats sounded sharp and clear. What do you guys think about all of this? If you live in the United Kingdom, France, or Germany, are you afraid of what Iran might do in response to this move, or do you think this is a bluff? Let me know in the comment section. In any case, the move by the 3 European countries includes a demand that Iran return to nuclear negotiations, allow international inspectors broader access to nuclear facilities, and provide explanations for the missing uranium stockpile. Under the mechanism, the sanctions will be reinstated automatically within 30 days unless the Security Council votes against the reinstatement. In remarks on state television on Thursday, Arakshi revealed an interesting detail about the fate of Iran's enriched uranium after the summer attacks and the war between Israel, the US, and Iran. Our enriched uranium is buried under the ruins of the nuclear facilities that were bombed, he said, in a first-of-its-kind acknowledgement that the material survived the Israeli and the American strikes in June. It's important to point out that this may or may not be true. It's one of the possibilities that was offered by Western intelligence agencies following the 12-day war in June, but there has been no official confirmation of this, and it's exactly what you'd expect a senior Iranian official to say if the missing uranium was in fact being hidden somewhere else. In this context, it's important to remember that a Reuters report from June revealed that most of the enriched uranium at the Fordo facility was deliberately moved days before the attacks, a move indicating prior intelligence about plans to strike this facility. And with that in mind, Arakshi went on to say that the Supreme National Security Council in Tehran will decide on the state's response if the sanctions are indeed reinstated, but refrain from revealing details about the nature of the steps that are under consideration. At the same time, the International Atomic Energy Agency published worrying data on the progress of Iran's nuclear program recently. According to the agency's report, from the beginning of the month, Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% increased by almost 8% before June, before the strikes, and reached 440.9 kilograms. This enrichment level is very close to the level required to produce a nuclear weapon. And the United States responded on Wednesday with an urgent call for Iran to take immediate and concrete action to meet its international obligations on nuclear security. Washington warned that the IAEA Board of Governors may be forced to take additional steps if Tehran continues to refuse cooperation with international inspectors. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to bring you all the truth about what's happening here on the land in Israel. Most importantly, beyond spreading the truth, you need to pray. So pray for wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders. It's very complicated, as you may see from this updates that we keep posting. The situation is very dynamic and there are no clear answers. So let's pray for wisdom. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers that are encircling Gaza City and preparing for the fight of their lives against this Hamas terrorist organization. The terrorists are also preparing, by the way. Let's pray for the hostages that, as they are being moved, will be discovered by an IDF soldier and be released. Let's pray for that. Let's pray for the hostages to be released. Let's pray for all this war to end in a way that will keep Israel safe, the Palestinians with a future that's better than terrorism, and this region preparing for multiple peace agreements, deals that will make everybody's lives a lot better. It's possible. God can make it happen. And let's pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.